Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Ian Fraiser. Ian is the Senior Art Director at the Center for Mission Mobilization. He is based out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. He has a wonderful wife and kids, and we're going to get a chance to know him a little bit and a little bit about his story today on raising full support when you work in the office or you work at HQ. Is that even possible? And all that good stuff. So first of all, before we dig into all that, Ian, my friend, welcome. Glad you could be with us today.
Man, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, you are a cool guy that I never get enough time to spend. I just don't get enough time to spend with you. Like we run in some of the same circles, but often they're on parallel tracks. They're not the same track. So Support Raising Solutions, of course, is a part of the Center for Mission Mobilization. And so, of course, I partner with Support Raising Solutions. And, of course, Ian does a lot with Support Raising Solutions. But Ian, you also do a lot that has to do with mobilization that isn't specific to SRS. So we want to hear about a little bit of that too. But before we do, again, welcome, my friend. And first of all, just tell us about you. Tell us about your family.
Yeah. So I am, I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in the Philippines. My parents are missionaries, which I think definitely has colored my understanding of support raising in a good way for the most part. But I moved here right before high school and then went to school here in Arkansas and got a design degree because I loved it. I love typography, colors. I can talk someone's ear off about the intricacies of this particular typeface or whatever. So that's what I love doing. But I'd always kind of had in the back of my head, am I going to be involved in missions in some way? I wasn't sure. But I got to do an internship down at Gospel for Asia the summer after my sophomore year.
Okay.
And we did this little seminar for the interns, and that was the first time I'd really come in contact with the idea of unreached peoples, I think, and it really smacked me over the head. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And the funny thing is, my wife Stephanie was ahead of me on that journey. She had already decided that she wanted to be involved in reaching the unreached in some way. And I was really attracted to her. I was pretty sure she was attracted to me, but I had backed off, stayed away from her because I didn't want to mess with what she felt called to do. And so, it was only after I realized that this is what my life is going to be pointed towards too, that we started dating. And now we've been married for 10 years. We have an 8-year-old son. And we just gave birth to a daughter. She's 3 months old. So it's been so much fun being back in the baby world and just having our time sucked away, just staring at her.
Yep. Yep. They're incredibly, I guess, entertaining and also time consuming. That's not always a bad thing, but It definitely changes the flow sometimes at home, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it's been a good transition overall. My son has done an incredible job of being big brother. It's really fun to watch him.
Cool. So we're going to talk about ministry stuff for sure, but tell us a little bit more about your son. What does an 8-year-old in 2020 living in the Fraiser household, what does he like to do for fun with his dad?
So we enjoy reading a lot. So, often we'll be reading some book after supper or whatever. But then probably our biggest pastimes are Legos and wrestling. Those are the two things that he's like, okay, these are the things we got to go do, Dad.
Awesome.
So always a good time there.
except for when the Legos get left on the carpet and you're walking through the room at night and suddenly you have a hard time not cursing the creator of Lego.
Yes, and when you combine the wrestling and the Legos, then
Oh,
you're rolling around in your back, and yeah, that's not fun.
nice little brick addictions. Okay. Well, hey, let's start talking about the support raising thing, and in particular, you have a great job. You have a very necessary job. But I want to say this on the outset: you are fully funded. You have been for 7 years, and it's really not that uncommon, Ian, for me to meet someone that either they're believing the lie or they have been impressed upon them. They've been told by others that no one's ever going to give. No one wants to
Mm,
support someone that's working back in the office. Like somehow, I guess it's less attractive, or you're a secondary missionary. And you and I very much know that is not true, but
right.
a lot of people think that way. So, did you think that way, or did you have to battle through some of that? Tell us a little bit about your story and being a fully funded missionary that works at headquarters.
Um, it's been a little bit of a battle here and there, and it's hard sometimes to distinguish what are the things that I come up against are just common to a support raiser in general, and which of them are particular to me as HQ staff, headquarters staff. But I think it did take me a while to raise support initially. I made a lot of mistakes early on. But lack of perseverance wasn't one of them. I,
Okay.
I essentially I didn't give up. I I still have a lot to learn about raising support well,
Hmm.
and a lot of maturing to do through that process. But I'm never going to mature. I'm never going to grow through the experience if I don't actually just sit down and do it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think essentially, I, for me, especially at the beginning, as I was, I mean, I did not, I took more than the 100 days, like it was quite a while. And as I
Yeah.
was sitting
A lot of
there,
people do.
yeah, and realizing like, okay, am I really going to keep on doing this? It's not that there wasn't a plan B, but I'd looked at plan B and plan C and sometimes plan D and decided I still want to go with plan A. Like
Yeah.
this is, I remember just remembering Peter saying like, who else do we have to go to, Lord? Like this is what I felt like I was called to do. And this is what I wanted to do, honestly. And so I was just going to put my nose to the grindstone and keep on doing it.
Well, that is one of the more consistent things that I find with people who are fully funded is there are some difficulties along the way, regardless of their job, gender, nationality, color of their skin, any of that. It's hard on everybody, and sometimes we can make excuses why we're not being successful at raising support.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly heard some doozies, having trained a lot of boot camps, but other times, many times, the people that I know that are fully funded, they certainly ran into some real, not made up, but they're real tension, but they had a conviction of obedience, and that plan A is the only plan. In fact, there's a person. I'm going to leave a lot of this stuff out of there. There's a person that is out there in the internet space. So I'll leave it at that. Who talks about support raising, and they are convinced the main reason they never got fully funded, first of all, had to do with some identity things, but secondly, it had to do with they really raised support because their father told them it was impossible, which I'm okay, whatever motivates you, that's
Right.
fine. But staying fully funded, that wasn't a real good vision, because long term people are like, okay, helping you prove your dad wrong. Okay, that's
Right.
one thing. But what's your vision? What's your reason for this? And that person was not able to stay fully funded, and they blamed it on one of those other excuses I already threw out there, instead of it being, well, no, you didn't actually see it through. You ran into some difficulty. You had some problems. Some are real, some are perceived, but you stopped. You gave up.
Mm-hmm.
And sounds like you had some real reasons to potentially stop and give up, and you don't have to go through all of those. But it sounds like you really, I mean, you realize there is no option B here. And I'm assuming that was true for Stephanie as well.
Yeah, I mean, she's not in the office every day by any means. She doesn't have an active role in the day-to-day ministry, but she's fully on board with what we do, and and fully trusts that this method is a good way to do it.
Mm.
And I think early on, my personality is such that it's easy for me to just put my head down and go.
Okay.
And I think early on I was a little, I thought that it would not be good to look at plan B and C and D. But as I've matured a bit, maybe, I think it is healthy to take a real stock of, okay, if I wasn't doing it this way, what would I be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and actually consider those things fully. It's not, it's not a betrayal, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
to fully consider other options.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, at least, it led me straight back to what I was doing with greater conviction.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm glad you shared that. I definitely had a similar experience at one point. I was contacted by a church that really wanted me to come in and basically pastor their pastors, full-time, guaranteed salary, all that kind of stuff, and good
Mm,
salary at that. And I think that was probably option B for a while. And
yeah,
I kept coming back to, not that that's a bad job, but that's not actually what I'm called to do. That wouldn't be obedience for me. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't give that a hard look at one point and count the
yeah,
cost. And then ultimately I felt like, no, this is what God's calling me to do, and this is what I have to do, even though it's not easy. And I applaud Ian that you put your head down and stuck with it. And I'm sure you had some hard days, but at the end of the day, yeah, it sounds like you got fully funded 7 years ago. And but also, let's talk just a little bit about what your role is at the Center for Mission Mobilization, because
yeah.
there are people that go, how did you do that? I mean, surely, you're on the quote unquote front lines, like you're getting on an airplane all the time and you're in the field, right? And I would say, yes, you are on the front lines. It's just your front line is different. You're not second class missionary.
Yeah.
You're super important. But tell us about that, because I'm sure we have some listeners that are like, how does somebody work, quote unquote, at the office and get people to actually join their team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it. So my role, you mentioned my title is a senior art director. I
Mm-hmm.
work on a team of creatives who are professionals. Like our passion and our skill set and what we think about day in and day out is how can we tell the story of mobilization well. And so we're taking care of all the brand management, all the resource development, all the publication development, basically whatever we can do to help our staff succeed and to help the organization succeed from a communication standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned that I can just put my head down and work, and that can be an asset. One downside of that is that sometimes I don't look up and see like, hey, what is the impact that my work is having? And I think that's really key for us who work at a home office or stateside, is to remind ourselves, like, how can I draw that line between the things that I'm doing every day to the results that are happening, quote unquote, on the field.
Yeah.
And so, it's not just good to rehearse those things so that we can tell our support team about it. It's good to rehearse those things for our own sake. It's good to remind myself that, this booklet that I'm working on is probably going to be read by a Chinese man or woman, and it might change their idea of what their life path is. And being able to find that thread, so to speak, between what we do here and and the heart change that's happening around the world, I think is really important. And I think part of that is just, for me at least, the way that our organization is structured. We've got teams all over the globe that are working to mobilize nationals to go as missionaries. And so for me, part of it is going to our field teams and saying, like, tell me stories, basically, like, what's really awesome that's been happening in your ministry, because to a certain extent, I was part of that story. And I get to have a role in whatever fruit is happening there.
If you love to read, we have an entire blog article archive on support raising, from biblical encouragement to practical tips to stories and personal experiences. Meanwhile, there's different articles that are more along the lines of shaping culture, elevating training, and building infrastructure so that you can multiply your coaching within your missions organization. Either way, you might want to go check out some of our articles at supportraisengsolutions.org/blog. Hey, I got one for you right now, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, we completed an SRS boot camp, and I know that you've personally put a lot of hours, and your teammates as well, a lot of hours in helping us develop and tweak and redevelop our world-class appearance for everything, from our notebooks, to our workbooks, to our facilitator guide, to the slideshow. Like, I know you've put a lot of work in there, although there is a slide I'd like you to change. We'll talk about that later. but yesterday at the end of the boot camp, we often will allow a little time where we encourage people just to bear witness, bear testimony, give it to God, but publicly. And we just say, how has this changed you, this whole process of doing your boot camp prep and watching the videos and then coming to the boot camp and engaging and reading the God Ask book? Like, what has God done in your life and in your heart? And Ian, we get a lot of great, wonderful answers, but here's one for you that I say, hey man, this wasn't just mine. This was our fruit that God allowed us to have, you and me and others involved with SRS and with your creative team. Mm-hmm. But there was a guy that made no bones about it. He when he kind of had his turn and he unpaused himself, because we were doing this one virtually, and he said, I think y'all might have saved my marriage.
Dang.
And my ministry.
Wow.
Very significant.
Yeah.
And we didn't get a chance to dig into all of his stuff, but I had heard him speak a couple times prior to that over a few days' time. And it sounds like they had never even considered that fully funded was possible. They certainly didn't know the way forward on that. And it was creating a massive amount of stress on this guy's relationship with his wife, as well as with even question his calling and his obedience. And I'm still today, I'm waking up praising the Lord that we were able to be a part of that for him and his family and ministry. But also, that is a story of a changed life. That's not just the SRS teams, right? That's not just Mark Wilson's and Kathy Wilson's and Sue Osborne's and Jessica Wood and Callie Buchholz. Like, that's not just there. That's their support team, but also that's yours. And that's the type of story that you need to hear, even though you're quote unquote in the office. Man, we couldn't do what we do in the boot camps if you didn't do what you do. Your job is crucial to us doing our job well. So, hey, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of fun. We had, I don't know how many late nights on the initial boot camp workbook, ordering in pizza. And I remember leaving the office once, and it was like, okay, I have maybe 6 hours to go home, eat some food, rest, and come back and present this thing. Like, I'm like right up to the line. So it's a lot of good work, a lot of fun work, and we enjoy getting to be a part of it.
So Ian, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the challenges that you have found in being an HQ missionary?
I think, there are certain phrases that people say that stick in your head sometimes. I've had people say, when are you going to get a real job? I've had people say, we want to focus our giving on overseas staff, and you can kind of deal with those in your head.
Sure.
But I think maybe for me, what's been one of the most interesting challenges is essentially living right next door to my supporters. So, I mentioned I'm a missionary kid. And so for me, visiting supporters meant flying across an ocean and going to churches, going to people's houses, being, quote, on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were doing our work, you didn't have to be on. You could do your work sort of in isolation on the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this experience of bumping into my supporters at the grocery store has been a little off-putting for me at times,
Sure.
because I don't tend to be the person who everyone knows and who's always drawing people into this or that. I tend to be happy being on the sideline and fully participating, but not being the person up front.
Right.
Additionally, I tend to be quieter about the things that are more important to me, because they are vulnerable to talk about how important they are to me. So I don't know if that's a character flaw, but anyway, that's something that I struggle with. So I think it's been just something that I've been learning recently, is that I have a responsibility to be a good ambassador for my organization and for Christ wherever I am. And I think that means that when I do run into someone at Walmart or the auto body shop or wherever, and they ask how things are going, how are you doing, then I am willing and ready to talk about, this is how I'm doing personally, this is how ministry is going. And I think that's been really advantageous for me, even in getting new supporters, because I'm more willing to be the, quote, missionary guy,
Mm.
and be known in circles that have nothing to do with missions or whatever. That I'm willing and ready to talk about why I'm excited about what God is doing in my ministry, and that just comes naturally to my lips.
Right.
And that's something I'm still growing in. But
Sure. Sure. And it sounds like the sort of thing that it's not like, perform, dance, dance, dance.
right,
Like you'd never want to feel that way. But sounds like what I hear you saying, I think, is part of your maturity perhaps has been to
mm-hmm.
realize, I get to give like on the spot updates every now and then. It doesn't have to be a major burden, but I need to be ready, because sometimes people, they are my partners in
Yeah,
ministry, and they're happy to see me. And now I would say you probably need some good boundaries too. In
yeah,
fact, there have been a couple of times, I don't do it very often. There have been a couple of times when I have told a supporter, man, can we just not talk about ministry?
right,
Like, I
yeah,
love my job. God is changing the world through our partnership. This is great. Also, I'm really tired today. I had a 65-hour work week.
yeah,
And I haven't done that very much, but I've done that a couple times. And actually, I felt like my supporters were glad I was human. They're
yeah,
like, oh man, yeah, that's no problem. That's great. Yeah, no problem. Well, I probably needed to read your newsletter this month instead anyway. Ha ha ha. Or whatever. But and there are other times where I have one person in particular. Almost every time I see him, he's like, man, I just want to hear. He's like, I love hearing stories that change life, and I know God is using our ministry. Like, so what happened this week? He's like, I know
yeah,
you got something. You always do. So rather than being like, oh, leave me alone, like
right,
I've learned over time, like, hey, he's a good reminder
mm,
that God is very much at work, and it's kind of exciting that he wants little updates now and then. Now,
yeah,
obviously, I can say no, like we need to have good boundaries. We don't want to feel like we're performing or on stage all the time, but
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a little different when you run into your support team potentially at the grocery store or at the
Yeah.
ball field, or you're sharing the same zip code, right?
Right. And I think it comes down, the key to it is kind of what this guy is pointing out, is that he is actually interested in what you do. And I think sometimes I believe that my friends, my supporters are not that interested. And so that's why I don't talk about it. And when I realize, when I put myself in their shoes and think, would I be curious about what that person is doing? Then it's far easier for me to remember that I need to, mention something. And if they seem interested, just dive in and tell them some cool stories or whatever. So
Very cool. Very good example. Very, very good story. Very good narrative. Very good reality for you to bring up in all this, because we do have some supporters, or excuse me, we probably have some listeners that are specifically, that's one of their concerns with raising support in the same area. In fact, I've heard some people go, I'd really rather just raise my support in a different town. And
right.
I'm like, it's probably a little harder to do that. Like, it's okay to raise and live off support in the town in which you live. So, now that being said, full disclosure, I did have a neighbor once who approached me and they're like, "Hey, I got like $300 a month. I want to be given to missions." And in that moment, I felt the Spirit lead me, but in that moment, I actually referred them to somebody else. I didn't want, and I could have, but I didn't feel like it was crucial for me to have my next door neighbor who like I actually see all the time on my support team, just because I didn't want to have this, I didn't want to feel weird about going out in the yard and playing catch with my sons, or I didn't want to feel like I needed to explain myself all the time. And sometimes that's there, and that's not necessarily healthy. You don't have to explain yourself all the time. But anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge there is something to that, and we want to be thinking about that, whether, if we're going to live in the same area as our support team.
Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of being a headquarters missionary is that you get to show that your job, I'm a designer. I get to show that in itself is worthwhile for the kingdom. I do design because I believe that story is important, because beauty is important to God. And those core beliefs, hopefully, are at the center of my brothers and sisters who work for, quote, secular ad agencies and design boutiques. And so as I get to show that me as a designer is like that work is worthy of being supported, then that actually does bring some worth and some credibility to the person sitting across the table from me, who, maybe they sometimes wonder, man, it does me, being an accountant or being a car mechanic or whatever, is that really pleasing Jesus? Well, yes, it is. And it's a cool thing that we get to do, to sort of knock down the idea that missionaries are the pinnacle of Christian service,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I think we've shared a little bit here already about you and how you do raise full support and how this is a part of it. But next week, Ian, when we do our because we're going to do the second part of this, let's pick that up with, how do you connect the dots for somebody that's on your support team, or you're inviting to be on your support team? How do you connect the dots that you're a part of lives being changed, even though, let's be honest, you sit at a computer a lot of the time and you play with your crayons? Okay, I know it's a lot more a lot more advanced than that. So if you'll join me again next week, let's pick up right there and talk about connecting that dot that office staff need to do regarding stories of changed lives. So are you good to go? Okay, great. Well, for this episode, for this week, Ian, thank you for joining me on the SRS podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you so far, and let's keep going next week.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, Be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.